But I really want to highlight it's every single person. You can always think about maybe 5 people who've had a deep influence on the trajectory of your career or your life. And you've got to make those decisions. Who are those people? When you meet them, it mightn't be obvious, but they make that change. And from going from a big corporate role into a startup, and I think anyone who's been in a startup knows when you go to sleep at night, everything stops and it starts when you wake up in the morning and get going again. That's the way I would sort of describe it, as what inspires you and how does it work? You're inspired, you take the leap, obviously not stupidly. You burn the boats and burn the bridges, and you have to employ all of your passion and all of your brains to do it.
John Rajchert, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders and the Matthias Experiment. I'm so excited to be experimenting with you over the next while and diving into your world, which is pretty different than the worlds I'm usually in. So this is why I do the show, and I'm so excited for that. So John, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's good to be with you, and looking forward to our talk.
All right, so John, diving right in, tell me a little bit about your world. How would you describe it in your own words?
So, my world as an entrepreneur and as a co-founder and CEO, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Lit Thinking. It's an interesting name, and it has a lot to do with being smart and having something to do with light, the light spectrum. What we do is we believe we're going to change the world, believe it or not. And what we specifically focus on are aerosolized pathogens, big terminology. Basically, viruses, bacteria, spores, and what the easiest way to describe it is the common cold, tuberculosis, COVID, influenza, and a lot of hospital-acquired infections. All of those are principally the principal way you catch them is through aerosolized pathogens you breathe in and you get an infection. So imagine somebody sneezing in your face. That is a lot of how you catch colds. What we do is we use human-safe, invisible light in the far ultraviolet spectrum, which is very, very safe for people and very, very effective against pathogens. And this is something which has been known about for a long time in general, but the way to apply it is only recently understood. The ability to actually be exposed to the light, not harmed, and have a very, very, very effective way of reducing your risk of infection. And we think that this is the right thing to do for the world. It's the right thing to do for science. And again, the trajectory of this is going to be a mega trend, and it's going to change the way we live.
So John, can you walk me through just a little bit more what's changed in the world, and what has been unlocked that is now enabling us to do what you're doing at scale?
Good question, Michael. So if you think about light, what's been very, very well known for over 100 years is ultraviolet light, in effect, kills germs. It inactivates viruses. And the way it does that is it damages them. They're simple, very, very simple cell entities. And if you can damage them to a point where they can't replicate, you've effectively killed them. Same story with bacteria. And what we do is we use ultraviolet light to do that. Now, the problem that's been long known is while it's very effective against germs, what it does do is burns you. And everyone knows that whoever's had sunburn has experienced that firsthand. And there's always been this view of, oh my goodness, ultraviolet light, it's great, but you can't get too close to it. It's as simple as that. In the 2010s, a really incredible scientist called Professor David Brenner from Columbia University, he along with others, but he principally spearheaded this idea that is there a frequency in the UV spectrum which is effective against germs but doesn't harm people? And what we found is that there's this space called far UVC, ultraviolet C spectrum. It's right at the end of it, 200 to 230 nanometers. And just for reference, 400 to 700 is the visible spectrum. And then you go into the ultraviolet spectrum, then you go into microwaves. So this specific wavelength, what we found is that it doesn't penetrate the skin. It doesn't get through that dead skin layer, those very, very, very top layers that don't have a problem because they're dead skin already. And a similar story with the eyes. So here we have this amazing discovery, which is I can kill germs. I can effectively inactivate pathogens without harming people, without harming animals. And since around 2014 through to now, there's been a lot of research which has been accelerated by COVID that continues to build the evidence that it's very, very safe in effective doses for humans, and it's very effective against germs. So that's where we see a big change, because you know, if you think about our ancestors, 200 years ago, it was pretty obvious that 5 children born into a family, a couple of them would die of illness, and it was something that everyone would just simply, well, this is the way of life. It's a very hard life. People die early, they die young. And today it's in the first world, certainly it's something that is a horrifying prospect, because we've had antibiotics, we've had all of those things. Well, today we're living in an environment where it's fine to spend a week, a year on your back in bed or at home with a horrible cold or the flu, or God forbid, something more serious. And the world has millions of people who die of hospital-acquired infections, but other things like tuberculosis and even the common flu claims over 1 million lives annually globally. So these are real issues that we kind of have that mindset, which is, oh, well, it's just a cold, it's just the flu. The productivity burden is huge. So we think that this is something which is obviously for the day-to-day work. There's a market there, a latent market just for normal living. But what about for the pandemics? And I can talk to you about that as well.
Okay, this is really interesting. You're really taking I love the going back to the analogy of the way we've treated different, I guess, just accepted situations in our life, and now we don't necessarily have to conform to those same standards, but we can level up and in very fundamental areas of how we live our life, like what you're mentioning, with the cold. And I was also really curious from a product perspective what you said about the fact that one of the big enablers here is this new wavelength, right? This new that doesn't burn the skin, and that is why you can now exercise this safely. How much explaining does this require to get people who before considered this to be harmful to now accept it as not? How do you do that transition? It feels difficult.
It ain't easy. And I think for the people who are listening, and it's particularly if you've got founders and entrepreneurs who are right at the beginning of an adoption curve, it's one thing to join a market where there is an existing solution, but it's another thing to say, I have a solution to a problem that's not well articulated. Nobody wants to talk about COVID anymore. Everyone wants to forget about it. You go out and you burn your masks in a sacrificial bonfire in your yard, because nobody really wants to talk about it. But the reality is that you've got, let me say one other thing. Prevention is hard to sell. It's a lot easier to sell a cure than it is to sell prevention. So we're right at the beginning of this market. And what we know is that it's hard to get people to do something when they don't have an apparent problem. Your biggest competitor, as they say, is doing nothing. I think a lot of people, when you think about the psychology, I'm always going to go on a diet tomorrow. I'm always going to start my exercise regime next week, not today. And it's that trying to get that across the line. So that adoption of new innovation curve, color TVs, cellular phones, tablets, air conditioning, microwave ovens, you name it, all have their own story. Washing machines, electricity, the radio, everything has its own story. But in general, things are speeding up. And what we know is that there are a couple of things that really changed the game. And you're looking for that as an entrepreneur and as a startup. You're looking for what is it that is a compelling reason. Now, the logic, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. There's hundreds of millions of lives at risk when it comes to the next pandemic. It won't be another 100 years, obviously. Population growth, viral mutation, proximity of animals and people. It's guaranteed that there's going to be, mathematically, there's going to be another pandemic. But people won't buy on that. What they will buy on and what they will understand is you focus on people who are early adopters, people who really are fascinated by this and have a linkage to a personal story and a crusade. And what we do is we look for those early adopters who understand the technology and want to join us on that journey. And that so far is starting to work in the healthcare industry. It works even in general offices, places of worship, mass transit. There are always going to be case studies where you've got a buying the decision that's made that's influenced by something which is just a little bit out of the ordinary. So you're looking for those imperfections in those early adopters. And what we also do is look at, well, what else can far UV do? And our device is very clever. It's connected. It works. It's certified. It's very, very effective, and it exists here in the US. It's UL approved. It's EPA approved, and we've made sure that we're very, very compliant. So you answer those first two questions: does it work? We have plenty of independent studies to show it works, and a lot of scientific data. And then, is it safe? And again, over 100 studies, internationally recognized studies, peer reviews show that it's safe, along with regulatory approval. So you have to start with that. Does it work? Is it safe? And then the discussion can commence. And then you look for other imperfections that you're trying to solve. What other problems? Well, far UV also is very effective against mold. That's a dirty little secret in a lot of buildings, mold. It also helps with energy efficiency, simply because in the US, the CDC has recommended a minimum of 5 air changes per hour. Most buildings don't do 5 air changes per hour. What we're able to do is use a technique that purifies the air that gives you the equivalent of up to 100 plus air changes an hour. So you think about, well, I don't want to upgrade my air conditioning because that's going to cost a lot. It's going to spend a lot of energy. What we're able to do is provide a solution which is far more cost effective. 14 watts per device goes into the ceiling. It's very, very cost effective, and it's silent, and it's continuous, and it works. So you're looking for the solution set that's going to solve a problem, even if that problem is unstated at the moment.
Wow. So, I mean, all of that sounds for you as an entrepreneur, it adds pretty interesting challenges beyond just the product development, the traditional challenges of selling and everything in between, right? I mean, it's you're adding on really rethinking and reshaping a market and perceptions, which I think is quite an interesting endeavor to take on. What has led you here to this journey?
Great story. Everyone's got their own story, and if you think about your life, there's these, what I would call, almost poles, these points that change the trajectory of your career or the trajectory of your life. And for me, I'm a 30-year veteran of Honeywell International. And before that, I'm an electrical engineer. I ended up joining the British Merchant Navy for a couple of years, and that changed my life. I'm Australian. I was a boy who was born in Sydney, and I ended up, in effect, running away to sea and joining the Navy and becoming an electrical officer on a cruise ship. I traveled the world, and it opened my eyes. But there was that point that I worked with a guy who'd done it and who influenced me. And he said, why don't you call and why don't you apply? And I did it, and it changed the trajectory of my life. I came back to Australia after a couple of years as an international citizen. I worked in this great company, and it was about having people who were influencers who say, have you ever thought? They open your eyes up, and you start expanding sort of the possibilities for your life. So many of us constrict ourselves. Anyway, to cut a long story short, a really successful 30 years, I ended up as the global president of Honeywell Building Solutions. a large multi-billion-dollar business unit. Again, leveraging that global experience, leveraging engineering, and a real passion for saving energy and making buildings more effective. And then an opportunity came up, and this opportunity, again, to sort of cut to the chase, one of the world's greatest property developers, Stephen Ross, who's the founder and chairman of the related companies here in the US, and a guy called Matt Higgins, who is the co-founder and CEO of RSC Ventures, the venture capital arm. I met with them, and they basically said, we think that this technology, this science makes sense. And we sat down and we agreed, and it was a big risk for me. And obviously they had a lot of faith that we would start up a company, and they provided the funds to start up this company and develop an offering and launch. And that was 2 years ago. And it's about taking risks, but I really want to highlight it's every single person. You can always think about maybe 5 people who've had a deep influence on the trajectory of your career or your life. And you've got to make those decisions. Who are those people? When you meet them, it mightn't be obvious, but they make that change. And from going from a big corporate role into a startup, and I think anyone who's been in a startup knows when you go to sleep at night, everything stops, and it starts when you wake up in the morning and get going again. The machinery doesn't keep happening. You've got to make it work. You're employee number one. You drag yourself out of the swamp. You dry yourself off. You wear any clothes that will fit you. You go out and figure out. You'll eat anything. You'll do anything to get going, to take the next step. And then it gets easier as it goes along. But it takes a lot of courage and a lot of a lot of adrenaline. But it's really that's the way I would sort of describe it, is what inspires you. And how does it work? You're inspired. You take the leap, obviously not stupidly. You burn the boats and burn the bridges, and you have to employ all of your passion and all of your brains to do it.
John, I love it, and that was sounds like quite a journey, and a very, very cool one. Coupled with a lot of inspiration and curiosity and excitement and great circumstances that have brought you to this moment. So John, I really want to thank you for joining me and sharing with me this journey and your insights. Wishing you best of luck, cheering from the side. Very excited for a world in which I'm not going to get a cold in the office like I usually do, and the many more benefits of what you're doing. And so thank you very much for everything.
Great. Well, litthinking.com, just as it's spelled, litthinking.com. Great to meet you, Michael, and great to talk to you, and wish you and your listeners the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.